A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Bondar from Christian Voice Australia is back with us. Some important questions we'll be asking. Can Christians use these cultural traditions to point people to the true meaning of Christmas? Get ready, that conversation is just ahead. Then we're 90 minutes away from talking about the power of Christian messages on our clothing. Now, it's not unusual, is it, to see Christian messages on a T-shirt? Well, we're going to unpack some thoughts 90 minutes from now. Then on Faith and the Future with Dr. Camille Majdali, our series is on the power of biblical meekness. And today, taking things a little deeper than you might think, engaging conversations ahead on this Tuesday edition of 2020. On this time on a Tuesday, we like to connect with Greg Bondar. He's the national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia, national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. Greg Bondar, a special welcome back to 2020.
Good morning, Neil. Good to be with you again.
Hey, Greg, let's talk gambling reform first of all. Good and bad news. Labor's refused to ban gambling ads. But they have stopped their misinformation bill. Hey, what are your thoughts here on developments around gambling?
Yeah, great news about the misinformation bill, Neil, and no doubt people will speak highly about the benefits of having that banned. But Neil, at the same time, the Labor have refused to go ahead with their gambling reforms. They've caved in, Neil, to media, to the gambling pressure, and any wonder with a federal election coming up in 2025, Labor are not prepared to take the risk of upsetting the media or the gambling lobby, so they've decided to shelve the gambling reforms, and thereby, of course, they've caved in, as far as I'm concerned, which is bad news for Christians and to all Australians now.
Yeah, I guess you've got to think of two sides, haven't you? When we think of, there's groups like the Christian lobbies and your own advocacy there. But then on the other side, there are powerful lobby groups that represent the gambling and the gambling industry. These are fairly significant, powerful groups, aren't they?
Oh, no, you do not want the gambling lobby or the sporting code lobby against you, in particular. Just imagine the revenue that the media make out of gambling, which is enormous. I know when we put in our submission, Christian Voice Australia made the point that the media were making megabucks out of gambling advertising. So if you're going to upset the media, you can expect them to be negative at the next federal election. So Labor, therefore, have caved in, sold their soul out to the media, to the gambling pressures, and Neil, this is not good because back in 2023, the MP, Peter Murphy, headed up a committee which was came out with the paper, You Win Some, You Lose More, which found that gambling advertising was grooming children and young people to gamble and said that the ads were inescapable. In other words, children were getting addicted, Neil.
So the sort of proposal that was there, and you've got to really dig deep to say, well, what's wrong with a proposal like this? But a ban on gambling ads online, and a restriction during sporting matches, and a restriction of just 2 gambling ads an hour on television. I mean, those sort of things don't sound too difficult. And for anyone who's a parent and you've got kids that like to watch sport, you would be certainly saying, well, those sorts of bans sound pretty like common sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. But not only that, if you're watching the news, and I know I watch the news every night if I can, the number of gambling ads that sort of pop up. And don't forget that, this is really a hardcore addiction that's going to end up, because what happens, and you and I both know, when we put in our submission, we called the submission All Bets Are Off, because we wanted to make the point that, there were struggling families with domestic violence, family breakups, children addicted to gambling, and it was important that the government made the decision to stop these advertisements, and they are still occurring at news time, before sport, and they come in high frequency, Neil. And as a Christian, I've got to say, I'd have to be totally opposed to it.
Let's be fair and put the boot in both sides here. You and I have been around a long time, and you can remember gambling reform being on the agenda going back generations, and neither side of politics has done anything. I noticed that there is a report from Peter Dutton who's accused Labor of a cowardly and craven capitulation. Now, if that was a representative of his determination to do something, that would be good. But I don't know whether anyone believes either side of politics on this gambling reform.
Oh, well, all is fair in politics and war. And Peter Dutton is now obviously capitalising the fact that Labor have delayed the introduction. But, I want to talk to Christians about this, because a lot of Christians are telling me, oh, look, I only buy a lotto or I buy a scratcher. But look, I went through, Matthew 6:24, you can't serve God and money, Neil. Greed, Colossians 3:5. I had a look at the 10 Commandments, Neil. Gambling's a breach of Commandment 1, 2, 8 and 10. And finally, I had a look at what addiction it has on children. I looked at 2 Timothy 2:26. Now, I'm sorry to have to quote these Bible verses. The point I want to make is that as a Christian, we've got to make sure that we support the banning of these advertisements in the interest of families, children, and of course for the general society as a whole, because quite frankly, it's a real curse in our families and society now.
Greg, last sitting week of Parliament, not likely to be on the agenda. The possibilities, if the government does come back in February, but that all depends on even the possibility of election timing and all those sorts of things. So it's not a matter of don't hold your breath here.
Oh, absolutely, because this is the next opportunity to debate the gambling ban would be in February. Now, you and I both know February. Albanese is going to have to, Prime Minister Albanese is going to have to make a call on the election. And once you call an election, Neil, you go into what's called caretaker mode, which means you can't do anything. So say goodbye to the gambling advertisements, as far as I'm concerned, in 2025. It's a real disappointment on Labor and, of course, for the general public that relies on, some form of protection from this curse that occurs in our TVs and radios on a regular basis now.
And you know what? I think there'd be a lot of listeners who'd be in agreement when you use a word like that, gambling being a curse. And for some people who think that's just a little fun-loving extra thing you do on the side to fill in a bit of time, there's a lot of families who've gone broke, who've disintegrated, and who are in disarray because of the gambling issue. And I guess it's one of those things, talk to your MP, ask them those questions and find out where they're standing on these things. Hey, let's turn to Christmas, and this time of year, there's a lot of people who are taking the kids off to shopping centres and sitting on Santa's knee and getting photos and things like that. And then all of a sudden, you've got some Christian thoughts into the whole mix here. And, is this the sort of thing, taking all the fun out of Christmas? Let's ask this question. You've been thinking through issues here. Should Christians support Santa Claus? What are your thoughts here?
Oh, Neil, look, I have to tell you that I cannot believe, or maybe I can believe, the amount of division there is within the Christian community over the significance or insignificance of Santa Claus. Now, my view is, I've got some wonderful grandchildren, and I'm going to take the approach that I'm going to try and integrate Santa Claus and the various traditions that go along with it to my grandchildren, but at the same time trying to point Santa Claus as a way to introduce the gospel and Jesus and what benefits there are of the traditional St. Nicholas, who really dedicated his life to serving others and making an example of himself to be like Jesus and give away gifts and what have you. So, Neil, we've got to be very careful, because it's a fairly divisive issue, and I didn't realise how much it was so.
I'm just thinking as you're sharing those things, there are some Islamic nations that ban Santa Claus because he is a Christian icon. So, there's a certain sense here in which you've got to, when you dig a little bit deeper, you can recognise a place for Santa Claus. But, there's this idea too that in some sections of the Christian community that if you include Santa Claus in your Christmas, then somehow or other you've compromised the story of Jesus. Any thoughts here?
Yeah, look, that's the point I want to make. I don't want to compromise Jesus. Look, Christ is the true meaning of Christmas. Let's make that perfectly clear. But at the same time, just imagine the joy that children, I'm talking about real children here, get at Christmas time with Christmas trees, bells, candles, lights, holly, mistletoe, and the reindeer. Look, I know these have nothing to do with the Bible. It says nothing, well, the Bible says nothing about it. The point I want to do is, what a great way to use Santa Claus and the traditional aspects of Christmas to lead in to talk about Jesus. And I think this is what we should be doing. You see, for me, Neil, the issue is that the Bible nowhere specifically indicates the day that, or the time of year that Jesus was born. A lot of scholars say that probably was September, October. The point I want to make is that it's Christmas, 25th, of December. This is what I'm going to be telling my kid now, very quickly. Was Jesus born? Yes. Is Jesus' birth worth celebrating? Absolutely. Was Jesus born on 25th of December? Probably not. Is 25th of December just as good as any other day of the year? Yes. Should Christians allow Santa Claus and Christmas trees to become the focus of Christmas? Absolutely not. Can Christians use these cultural traditions to point people to the true meaning of Christmas? The answer, Neil, is absolutely.
I had a conversation, Ed, just the other day, Lady Jo Hood, and she had written a children's book. And in this children's book, the story goes that the children go off to the shopping centre with their parents, and they're sitting on Santa's knee for their photograph with Santa, and the children ask Santa, whispering in his ear, "Do you know the real meaning of Christmas?" And of course, the children then, in a very simple way, are sharing a story about Jesus. So there's an illustration there. You're not the only one who's thinking through these issues, Greg, and no doubt there'll be lots of people in families all over the nation who are thinking, here we go again. Santa, and where does he fit? And I think the St. Nicholas story clearly gives you some historical evidence of a great saint who, as I understand it, was from around the 4th century, who did amazing things. In fact, this was an amazing icon of Christianity, of the original St. Nicholas. Now, he might not have been wearing a red suit, but he is a historical figure. So it's a matter of just, working through these things, I guess, in your own family environment.
Absolutely, Neil. Look, I want to make the point, I don't want Christians or any mum or dad or grandparent lying to their children or grandchildren. 1 Peter 3:10 clearly says that, we should not speak evil, watch our tongue, and keep our lips from telling lies. That said, Neil, there is nothing wrong in my view. And as you said, St. Nicholas was a person that was very generous, Christ-like in many ways. Let's use St. Nicholas as a means to get Jesus into the hearts of our children, grandchildren, and use Christmas, the tradition of Christmas, the old, Christmas trees, bells, and what have you, and gifts, and leaving cookies and milk out at night, or whatever it might be. Let's use that, Neil, as a way to get our children and grandchildren to accept that Jesus Christ is the true meaning of Christmas.
Only a few days away from the 1st of December, and there'll be a lot of people who say that's the date we put our Christmas tree up. And interesting, we're talking about Santa today, and actually discovering that he's probably much more Christian than all sorts of other things like Christmas trees and candles and bells and holly and mistletoe and all the things that go along with the reindeers and sleighs and things like that. But there's a certain sense in which, everyone's got to make their own decisions about how they actually present that within their family. I'll just share this and I'll get your thoughts too, but in our family, we've always decided to have a nativity scene ever since our children were very little, a nativity scene. Now we've got grandchildren and we've got a very much more sophisticated nativity scene, and you can really draw attention to the Jesus narrative, the Jesus history here, the incarnation, when you've got that alternative narrative that's sitting there, and then you can sort of incorporate the other elements of Christmas. Any thoughts from you?
I think that's pretty much the case with us as well, Neil. We've got grandchildren now, and we make the point. We've got a nativity scene that I set up, and my 4.5-year-old granddaughter has started to say, when I, started to look at setting it up, said, "What's that, Poppy?" And I said, "Wow, here's an opportunity for me to explain Jesus in the manger, the wise men, and what have you." This is a real good way, Neil, to try and get your children and grandchildren to start to understand, that Christ is the reason for Christmas, and we need to make sure that while we don't tell lies, we can certainly use Santa Claus and the Christmas traditions to get our families to understand the true meaning. I think it's a great thing. So, I'm going to play the Santa game with my grandchildren, but at the same time, we know what the real reason for the season is, and that's Jesus Christ now.
And you did recount for us a few of the facts when you said, for me, this comes down to, was Jesus born? The answer is yes. Is Jesus' birth worth celebrating? The answer is yes. We all come to a point where we've got to work out how the best way is, and, according to your own ethics and according to your own conscience as to how you actually work through those things. And I guess when you do things one way, not being judgmental about the way someone else is still on a learning curve as to how they're actually going to be putting all those things together. Hey, always good getting your insights, Greg Bondar. And for listeners to connect with Greg, and, talking Christmas is not all about the political stuff that sometimes we get into, but we did talk about that gambling reform issue just a little earlier. To connect with Greg Bondar, who's national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia. That's a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. They have a website, christianvoiceaustralia.blog. christianvoiceaustralia.blog. And Greg also wears a secondary hat. In fact, it's probably his primary hat, but, whatever hat you've got on, everyhomeforchrist.org.au too, to connect with Greg Bondar. Greg, thanks so much for your update today on 2020.
And God bless you, my friend.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.